What's going on, everyone? It's Mitch from RespectMargin.com back with another episode of the North American Weed Tour podcast, looking at the best in legal cannabis across the map. Today, joined by special guest, a fellow cannabis media entrepreneur, man. I got Noel Abbot, co-founder, CEO of Ganjapreneur. How you doing today, Noel?
Doing great, Mitch. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Likewise, man. Likewise. I always appreciate our conversations off air. So I'm excited to chat out there where the people can, get a little insight of the stuff that we be nerding out about. But before we get into nerding out too much, man, every guest I have come on here, I always kick it off with a little bit of insight to their origin story with the plant being cannabis. So I'm kind of curious when you and cannabis, began your relationship with one another.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, my first experiences were with cannabis were in my first year of college. Not to be a complete cliche, but it was like within a few weeks of showing up on campus. I had been pretty averse to substance use when I was in high school, just from narratives that I had been exposed to. Once I met people who were just like, no, this is going to be, pretty manageable, normal, and fun, I was just like, okay, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And then it didn't take me long to become a connoisseur, I would say. And then, this was probably 2004, 2005. So yeah, I've had a steady relationship with the plant ever since.
And what'd you major in college?
I was a creative writing major.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to college outside of LA. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. So after 4 years of living in LA, I was like, screw this. I'm going back to the PNW. Moved back to Bellingham, and that's where I've been since.
And what year did you start Ganjapreneur?
So we officially launched the company in 2014. But prior to that, it was a blog that my brother and I had just kind of started as a hobby in about 2000, like early 2013, I would say. And this was after Washington and Colorado had voted to legalize for adult use. It was before there were any licensed businesses or anything like that. We just thought this would be a fun project to build a blog. Basically, at that point, was all we really had aspirations to produce. But as we kept covering the industry, we just kind of kept expanding the website. In 2014, we got connected with our other co-founder, who also sort of gave us some funding to get us started. It was on a month-to-month basis of like, these freelancers need to be paid for these articles. I didn't actually work for the company until I think it was 2018 was when I quit my full-time job to focus on Ganjapreneur. Actually took a salary from Ganjapreneur.
Yeah, I know it well, man. Working another job while building up a website, I know that grind all too intimately. At that point, like you said, and that was going to be one of my questions of like only having those aspirations of starting a blog, kind of initially. Obviously, at that point, like you mentioned, we're from the same state. Washington and California were the only two states in the conversation. The business aspirations, especially from being from the media side, the ceiling was very low, right? You couldn't be like, oh, I want to be this massive site just covering this niche topic in this singular state or two. Did you like think or hope, hey, this is going to grow into a career? Or was it kind of like, this is just something that I'm doing for fun and I'll figure stuff out later?
Well, when it started, it was definitely just a hobby project. But, after pursuing it for, maybe about a year, that's when the idea started to formalize, in our conversations that like, this could really turn into a business that would be something that could sustain us going forward. And then, it was always very gradual and linear, the growth that we've seen. So it really was just kind of slow momentum build until we got to the point where we could start to pay ourselves, start to hire people eventually. And that's kind of been the story of our journey, is just very slow and steady.
And obviously, with having a website, you and I probably both understand the same concept, right? In the cannabis space, your social media, I view social media profiles as like places you lease. A website is an asset you own. Obviously, there is censorship, like you can't have a website, delisted from Google if you cross certain boundaries, but you have to go pretty far into some pretty, crazy topics for that to happen. But as far as like cannabis or whatever, hobbies are, a website is relatively safe, but social media platforms, it's always a risk for you guys starting out early on and then seeing the game evolve. How has like social media kind of helped and kind of hindered the growth of the website?
Yeah, that's a great topic to get into because it's a very conflicted relationship that we have with social media. Um, when it comes to growing our audience, it's been a very valuable tool. But as you said, it's no guarantee that it will be there permanently. Platforms can shut you down whenever they want. They usually don't provide any reason or justification beyond just like violation of policies that's left very broad. Um, and so there's always that threat, and that threat remains that even after having built a large following, we could still have it taken away. It's happened to other platforms with similar size following, so it's always something we're conscious of. On the other hand, social media provides a very affordable way to reach a large number of people, and so on that front, it's been, I would say, indispensable to how we've built our overall audience and our platform and the ways that we engage with people on a daily basis. Yes, we do send out an email newsletter. People click the links in our newsletter to go to our website. There's no social media involved, but a lot of people see our content through social media. They use our content to share via their own platforms. Um, and that's been a big driver of the just accumulation of readers over the years. It's also interesting. I know I've talked with you a little bit about this, but in the early days of advertising on Facebook and Instagram, this would, I would say, be before Trump's election and the huge focus on Facebook advertising that came after that. We were able to run campaigns on Facebook and Instagram without getting triggered by the filters or anything, and the engagement that we saw through the posts that we had boosted, because I have a background in marketing as well, and so I was familiar with how to use the Facebook advertising platform. Once I started boosting posts on Ganjapreneur just about the news, like, this state is considering a legalization policy, we're going to boost this article, the response and the enthusiasm of the audience was kind of crazy. It just like broke the algorithm compared to any other project that I had managed ads for. And so in the early days, we were able to make very selective investments into Facebook advertising to grow the audience. Of course, since then, any reference to cannabis or any mention of the plant on your website even will get your ad shut down. So it's not something that we can do anymore. But early on, I'd say that even leveraging the Facebook advertising platform was a great tool for expanding our reach and building our audience.
Absolutely. And you guys have that respectable following on Facebook. We have a pretty solid following on Facebook. Most cannabis, I always say cannabis has this really weird negative relationship fascination with Instagram. Like all cannabis loves Instagram, and Instagram fucking hates cannabis. But
Mhm.
for folks like ourselves who were doing this kind of before Instagram was the king of social media, right? Facebook obviously held that title, and it was just kind of a different beast. And even to today for us, my take on it is like Facebook is really great. It's great for news because not only can you share stories and headlines, but there's actually quite a bit of click through to websites. Obviously, you have like the AMP optimized page. You can open up the page within the app
Yep.
without going out. That you're not afforded that same interaction with Instagram per se. And something I've noticed as Instagrams became more popular, like even in our music section, is like we used to write about artists. They'd share the article. We'd get a bunch of traffic for it. Now we write about artists and they'll screenshot photos of the article and then they'll post that on their
Yeah. Yep.
Instagram. And so people read the article swiping through and we never get the web traffic. And I mean,
Yep.
it's fine at the end of the day, but it's been this weird
As
like
long as they
cultural
tag you in
shift.
the caption, it is what it is.
Yeah, and so there's no link in bio, there's no force to our website where we can, monetize their
Mhm.
traffic for for pennies on the thousands of visitors. But it's just this interesting cultural shift. Has there been things like that you've noticed, or ways you guys have kind of had to adapt the way like culture and media consumption has kind of shifted just even over the last like half decade?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's been a lot of different trends that we've noticed, and we've tried to, ride the wave of as we see them happening on social media platforms. Instagram being a great example, and to a certain extent, Facebook as well, with those like news summary videos that was about 5-8 years ago. Um, a bunch of big platforms like that emerged, and then they all kind of took over all the engagement with just these like summary news videos. We experimented with that a bit. I'd say the equivalent now is with reels on Instagram. It seems that the format via which you post dictates some of the engagement that the platform's willing to expose you to. So we always have to be paying attention to the ways that we're sharing our content and how it's presented. Um, but also, once we get into a established pattern, once we have a workflow set up, it's very optimized, I would say, for day-to-day management. We have a simple formula for our posts, and we do experiment and try new things every once in a while. But for the most part, our workflow is set, and our team is able to crank them out on a daily basis, quickly keep up with the pace of all the news that comes flooding through.
And on that subject, you guys, have you guys been remote kind of the whole time?
Yeah, we have been. So when my brother and I started the website originally, we lived in separate cities. It was all done through the internet. As we started to grow the team, it was all you know done through hiring via our email newsletter. Basically, people who were subscribers, we'd post a job opening. And so as we've hired new people, we've had to register our business in different states. I've had to get familiar with running payroll through digital platforms that make that easier than um, trying to run it all manually. There's all of these different digital tools that we use to maintain a purely remote existence as a business. And it's something that I've really been a fan of since the first day. Honestly, one of the driving factors for me to pursue self-employment was the fact that I didn't want to sit around in an office for 8 hours a day. Not that I hated my coworkers or anything; it just didn't feel like a productive way to spend my time. If I was going to be productive, I felt like I was usually more so when I wasn't surrounded by people chatting or interrupted by people stopping by just to talk about what they did over the weekend or whatever. I'm very much a person who wants to focus on whatever I'm doing and not be interrupted. So going for a business structure that was entirely, you know, remote was definitely the goal from the start. And it's definitely been a learning process. We haven't always made the right decisions about, what platform to try using or um, how the workflow should work. But once we dial it in, it seems like it really has just hummed very efficiently and effectively. And it seems like compared to other places that I worked in the past, the amount of opportunity for there to be any kind of workplace drama is just like completely eliminated because everybody's at home. They're just on their computers, they do their work, and then they're done.
Hey, you don't got to get to know someone enough to not like them, right?
Well, yeah, we do get to know each other, but luckily we're very thorough with our vetting when we hire people, and we all get along just great.
Nah, I love that. Yeah, we've been remote since before COVID, so that was COVID. We were ready for that, from that perspective. And I think it makes sense, in this day and age, like, especially as content scaled, right? Like I'm sure you've hired people who are kind of experts regionally, or their experience regionally adds to the value that they provide to the
Hmm.
platform. So not, you can't necessarily have a platform covering the whole country centered in one area, right? Or I mean, you can, but it's a little bit.
Right, it's harder. I mean, there are cannabis publications that have an office in one particular city where 95% of their team works. But I think having people spread across the country has definitely benefited us because we have the ability to tap into networks that already exist in different places, and then also it expands our talent pool. If we're able to put the ad for this opportunity out there to anyone living in the US who wants to work at home and do something related to the cannabis industry, like there are a lot of people who find that appealing, and so we've been able to hone in on really good candidates that way.
What I love is having people on the East Coast, so that way by the time I wake up, shit's already getting
That's a
done.
big part of it too. Yeah. I mean, there's kind of a race with the daily news cycle. A lot of the other publications are based on the East Coast or in the eastern part of the US. And us being on the West Coast, it was definitely something we noticed at some point. Like everyone else's newsletter is coming out 3 hours before ours.
Mhm.
Let's hire someone on the East Coast to get things started in the morning. Actually, one of our very first employees, who's our podcast host, TG Brandfault, also one of our main journalists, he's been working with us, I would say, for about 8 years now. And he was in Michigan when we hired him, but now he lives in New York. And so a lot of the editorial work for the day happens early in the morning. By the time we wake up on the West Coast, it's like time to review and get ready to publish everything.
Mm. Yeah, that's that superpower, man. One of the conversations we've had in the past, right, centered around kind of media and the relationships with PR. So I want to dig in on just the
Sure.
conversation of public relations for a little bit. Obviously, it's a big part of media, cannabis or not, right? Public relations is how companies usually have internal and or hire outsource um, work to just get the message out about their brand, to communicate with publishers. Me personally, I have like a love-hate relationship with that and have had that before cannabis, even dating back to when we were just doing music stuff. I had a love-hate relationship. Like a lot of good people that kept us in the loop, provided us with great opportunity, connected us with good opportunities and good stories. A lot of people just knocking on my inbox nonstop, really filling it
Right.
up with stuff that I'm not interested in.
Yep.
um, but I'm just kind of curious, just your general take, right? Like on the current landscape, like, there's been a conversation of a news story that broke yesterday with the Circle K gas stations and a lot of things around the headlines being somewhat accurate, inaccurate. And a lot of the blame went back to PR trying to spin the story in a way that got picked up in clicks and interest, but might not be the most truthful. So I'm just kind of curious, just your current perception of just public relations and its place in the cannabis industry or in cannabis media right now.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, as we've talked about before, there's definitely a prevalence of public relations when it comes to cannabis brands that are trying to make a name for themselves. A lot of them are brands that can afford to work with PR agencies. That's kind of a prerequisite. PR doesn't tend to be cheap. There's certainly exceptions where you can have a good public relations member of your team who's doing an excellent job. But when I say PR, I'm generally talking about the agencies that are third party platforms, and it's not cheap to hire a PR agency on behalf of your business. Um, and like you said, when PR agents are sending publishers a stream of pitches on a daily basis, for small publishers, I think it can be frustrating because they're usually not tailored to the publication specifically. It's just kind of like, you write about cannabis, you must be interested in this cannabis related story. Whereas, you have a very specific niche around cannabis, and we have a very specific niche around cannabis. And I'm sure, both of us have experienced plenty of pitches that are just obviously not a good fit for our publication. And while it's not like, it's not the worst thing in the world to get a bunch of emails, it definitely is draining at times. And it feels like people just are expecting favors from you, just because. And it occasionally there are pitches that are very well thought out, that are very like specifically tailored to the publication, and those are the ones that I'd say can lead to positive relationships and like actually generate content. But the vast majority of the announcements that we receive are like, this company hired this executive from this mainstream tech platform, and it's just like, well, we're we're primarily focused on policy, so we're going to have to pass on this just for future reference. But then the next day they send us the same, the same concept. And I guess as a small publisher, it's just it's hard to stay in business. First of all, it's hard to make money as a publisher. I don't know, for people who aren't in publishing, that may or may not be news, but publishing as a business is definitely difficult. Advertising sales as a business model can be very tricky, and you have to try really hard to deliver value. If you're going through some kind of third-party platform like Google Ads or something like that, first of all, they might not even accept a cannabis publication. Second of all, they're only going to give you pennies on the thousands of visits that you get, even though, for a particular advertiser to reach that specific segment of people who are avid cannabis consumers or who have careers in the industry, it's going to be a lot more valuable than a general Google audience. So, it's there are a lot of obstacles to building a successful publishing business. And I guess the thing that I would say for brands who are working with PR or brands who are considering working with PR is that you should think of a PR agency's ability to generate hype for your business more in the world of mainstream media, or publications that have a mainstream following where cannabis isn't their main focus, because they're the ones who are going to most appreciate having a story kind of pre-formatted for them and presented. Whereas journalists and publishers who focus on the cannabis industry, on a day-to-day basis, are going to be more interested in the really outstanding, unique, stories, and not so much the like, this company's hiring this person to be their executive. And I guess also just to not be afraid of reaching out to publications directly. Like, there are ways of getting your brand out there through a publication that's small and independent. And it doesn't have to be like a full-on sponsored article. It could be simply something as simple as reposting social media content, or distributing your announcement, or resharing your announcement, or something like that. I don't know, if I'm just speaking for myself, but I would say small publishers tend to be flexible with how they approach partnerships and relationships, just because it is difficult to monetize a publishing business. And obviously we have to balance the trust with our audience with the ability to work with advertisers. But I would say don't be afraid to reach out to publishers directly, and don't assume that having a PR agency is going to get you coverage in independent cannabis publications.
Absolutely. I mean, I associate with so much of that, and one of the things that I've always felt funny about, and we spoke about, is like, there's companies out there that would not buy an advertisement on our website, either one of our websites, would not pay money for that. You know what I mean? Would somehow in their mind think that's not valuable for me. I'm not going to pay for that, but they will pay far more money to a PR agency and put our website towards the top of their list of getting on. So they are paying to get on our platform, but not paying us. And it's
They're
not
paying
even in that conference, not even
an
necessarily
order of
paying
magnitude
media,
more than they would. Yeah.
but it is I want presence on your platform and your audience, and I'm willing to pay for it, but I am not willing to put money in your pocket.
Right.
I'll put it in someone else's pocket. And I just think that concept is like crazy. It's crazy to me. I don't understand it.
And I mean, it definitely stems from the taboo around relationships between publishers and advertisers and the creation of content and all of that. And it's definitely an ethical, navigation that you have to make as a publisher. And it's not, something where I would say anybody can just approach us and work with us. We're going to do our investigative legwork and make sure that, writing about this company is something that would A, be interesting to our audience, and then B, that we actually feel like they're doing something good for the industry. But if those two boxes are checked, then it's like, well, let's figure out what we can do.
Yeah, and that's at the end of the day, right? Like we have taken money for content, right? Like I always be transparent around that, and it's not always, and sometimes it's sponsored, sometimes it's a client that we work with on our agency, but through that agency work, we uncover some story, while we're touring to grow, and we hear some story and we're like, holy shit, this is a great story. And then we end up covering someone that's paying us. They're not paying us for that coverage, but we
Right.
would have never uncovered that story if we didn't have the rapport and the
Right. It's
relationship.
a foot in the door. It's a way to establish a relationship. Having some kind of a sponsorship or an advertisement in a small publication generally is going to be a very small fraction of what you would pay a PR agency, but it gets you that conversation that could then lead to having the opportunity to really pitch your story.
Yeah, it's I don't know. That's everything is relationships, and sometimes even myself, I put a lot of money into, maybe not directly into someone's hands, but there's a whole reason. You pay money for a plane ticket and a hotel and a pass to an event. You pay money to build relationships. Sure, you might not be putting in individual people's pockets, but you have to invest to to
Mhm.
make things happen, to find that right timing, to find that right relationship. And I like what you said. It is definitely this unique ethical balance of, how do we monetize what we do, but how do we be authentic or organic or true to who we are, our audience and our voice. And there's a lot of stuff in cannabis that's accused for play to play, not just in cannabis, in media in general, pay for play, right? Like whether it's Rolling Stones, like Cultural Council, whether it's Forbes, and I'm not shitting on or using them as negative
Oh yeah.
examples, but those are things that have been accused of, pay for
Yeah,
play,
New York
even.
Times, they have a content division. They've got like a content agency and there's sponsored content on New York Times. It's a it's yeah, it's an ethical balance that you have to strike, and you have to have nuance with how you approach it, and you have to have discretion and be able to say no to people. But when you find people who are a good fit and who want to have some kind of representation of their brand that's different than an advertisement, um, I wouldn't fault publishers for coming up with ways to accommodate that, as long as it's done in a framework that, like you said, is considerate of the bigger mission of what you're doing, and considerate of the audience.
Yeah, and we definitely, man, we've had clients in the past that we've done some work for them, whether it's through content we've created for them that ends up making its way onto our site, or just in general for them, and then uncovering something down the line that you never know, that someone's not who they say they are, or someone has a past that you cannot stand behind, that obviously they're not being upfront and telling people, and having to scrub all that content, give them their money back, because I'm not in the a business of taking money from people like you, and still paying the staff for all the execution of said content, and at the end of the day, losing money to cut the ties. And so that's why I always find it funny. No one's really accused us of that. In music, some people have said some things like, "Oh, this pay," and I'm like, "Bro, trust me, we've lost more money on content like in that regard than we've ever made." So if it was all about making money, there'd still be a lot of articles still on our site, and
Right.
shouldn't be there. Um, what is it for you that just, obviously, like, you guys have, policy, something you focus on, and you have, a set kind of parameters of the content that's ideal content to you. What in that kind of attracts you to a story? Like, what are the aspects to a story that attract you to want to pick it up, to want to highlight it? Is it, obviously, we have to weigh in, at the end of the day, we have to weigh in on traffic, right? It's not I always tell people, it's not a skeezy way, but we have to weigh in, like, whether this is going to be a search term we can win, or this is going to win on social media, or they have a following and the co-branded share, right? We have to take into account, at least some of the content we do, the aspect of gaining traffic. But then there also is that these are some things that we really want to discuss, that we really think is valuable. These are things that we want to get behind and support. And who gives a shit how many people read it? I just want the feel good inside of supporting this cause. But what are some of those aspects of, like, why you choose to talk about certain stories?
Well, yeah. So there's a lot of different variables that go into the selection of topics to cover. Um, And I'll just say right now that I'm generally not the one who chooses what we cover on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes I'm the one who makes the call if there's a question, or there's a disagreement among people on the team, or just uncertainty around whether or not this is something that fits with what we're trying to do. Sometimes I'll weigh in on that, but for the most part, I let our editor, my brother, as well as our other writers, just kind of debate that and come up with their own solution as far as what to cover on a day-to-day basis. That said, as far as what we would cover generally, we definitely lean towards policy coverage. We do business coverage on a regular basis, but honestly, it's usually when things go wrong. And that's partly because on a regular basis, we survey our audience about what they're interested in reading. We send out surveys via our newsletter. We get responses back, and we digest that information and process. And we directly ask people, of this list of types of content or topics, what are you most interested in? And then based on the data that we get, that is another factor that we use to decide what to write about. And in general, people in our audience have said that they don't want profiles of big, publicly traded MSOs and big brands. They are interested in profiles of small to mid-sized brands who are kind of embodying the dream of cannabis legalization, as many of the people who are participating in it view it as this opportunity for kind of an economic empowerment revolution of an industry. Basically, it's a really unique space, and I think that to treat it like any other business media landscape would be a flaw or a mistake. So for the most part, it's policy coverage, and we tend to focus on things like markets that are coming online, or developments at the federal level. And then sometimes if there's an acquisition or a major conflict between businesses, we'll cover that, or if there's some kind of controversy. And then we have a couple of series where we basically there's Q&A interviews that we do on a regular basis, where we pick someone who's either a founder or an important part of a team at a business that's doing something interesting, and we'll do an interview. Sometimes we'll do a profile of the business itself and just talk about this interesting brand, tell their story, something unique about them. And then we also have a media analysis series that our podcast host and main journalist, TG Brandfault, he basically comes from a media studies background. He's a professor at a college in New York, also in his spare time. And his specialty is in media bias. That's what he studied. And so he kind of developed a framework for looking at mainstream coverage of cannabis news, like if there's been a study or some kind of development in the world of science around cannabis. Obviously, people in the industry are familiar with the way that the mainstream media tends to cover that, with a lot of scare tactics and reefer madness stereotypes. Well, TG has a framework that he put together for pinpointing the examples of like clear bias within those pieces. And so whenever a story like that comes out, he'll write a follow-up piece analyzing it and say, this is all the ways that this reporter could have been a little less biased with their coverage. So there's a lot of different types of content that we're publishing on a daily and weekly basis. But yeah, like I said, it tends to be on the developments that are most impactful for people running businesses or starting businesses. And then also just based on the feedback that we get from our audience.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, getting the feedback. What do the people want? You got to feed them, man, and that's how you build a nice engaged following across all platforms. What are some of the projects you guys got, or new things you got in the works for the rest of this year and early next year?
Yeah, well, we're in the process of partnering with Outlaw Report, which is another publication. They focus on the East Coast, primarily Virginia, DC, Maryland, Delaware area. They've got a really good platform and audience, and we're partnering with them to kind of expand access for our advertisers and to help them run their advertising on their platform, basically. So we'll be able to run campaigns across both publications for anyone who's trying to build awareness for their brand in those regions. We have a new asset that we can leverage on their behalf, and then also we'll be able to cross-populate audiences and help each other grow that way. And I'm looking forward to pursuing more collaborations with other publishers. Like over the past 6 months, I've talked to a handful of publishers, yourself included, and I think that independent cannabis media platforms are going to be stronger if we all figure out ways of working together.
Mhm.
So that's sort of been my focus lately, and we are working on some things that aren't quite ready to announce yet, but I'll definitely be in touch with you about when they are. But kind of in that same vein of creating relationships between publishers that can be beneficial to brands and advertisers, and then also to help, just maintain awareness and relationships among the people who are building the industry from the grassroots.
I love that, man. This is near and dear to my heart. Near and dear to my heart. No, well, I really appreciate you taking out the time and hopping on the podcast today. I think you and I could potentially talk about this type of stuff all day. So I don't
Oh
want to
yeah.
cut you off, but we're going to save some for the next time, man. For people out there that want more information, ganjapreneur.com. Anything else you want to plug before I get you up out of here, man?
No, I'm good. I'm just happy to have some rain in the Pacific Northwest.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need it. Let's get these fires established, and let's keep the only smoke coming out of the end of a joint, man. You know
That's
what I'm
right.
saying? Awesome. Well, this is the North American Weed Tour podcast. I think we're running back-to-back episodes today, so we might be back with more content, but we're looking at the best in legal cannabis. Stay tuned for more content.